So we're getting into budget shortfalls, and we're talking about the impacts of, not funding things correctly. I want to talk about Social Security and where we're at for a second. This isn't necessarily a current event, but it's more of like a check-in, a checkpoint.
Okay.
Where are we and what's going on in the future? Are we in danger of losing this cornerstone of the American government?
Yeah.
So last week, the Congressional Budget Office confirmed some sobering estimates. By 2033, the Social Security Trust Fund will be totally exhausted. There will be no money left in the Social Security Trust Fund by 2023. If nothing is done, this will result...
2033.
Yeah, what did I say?
Did you say 20? I thought you might have said 23.
Oh, I might have. 2033
Yeah.
is when the Social Security Trust Fund will be totally exhausted. That means if nothing is done, all beneficiaries will see a 23% reduction in their payouts. This is about $17,400 less a year for a newly retired couple. This is the difference. This is the difference between poverty and not poverty for so many Americans. This 23% budget cut would decimate our elderly population.
Yeah.
So something must be done. So before Social Security's inception, more than half of elderly people in the United States lived in poverty. Today, because of Social Security, that number has fallen to about 10%.
It's wild.
This is because of Social Security providing a major income boost for most seniors, specifically, obviously, on the lower end of the economic spectrum. Social Security benefits account for nearly all retirement income for Americans at the bottom of the income distribution. Think about that. There are some people that only rely on Social Security for their entire retirement plan, which is scary. Don't do that. If you're watching this video, I beg of you to fund your 401k as much as you can if you're lucky enough to have one. If you don't, fund your Roth or regular IRA. Please, begging you. You'll thank yourself later. But for a lot of Americans, they didn't have the money to do so. They didn't have the education to do so. They had no idea that was even a concept. So a lot of people live off of these payments. And this is obviously going to impact non-white people the most, naturally, because these people have suffered most from economic disparities going back.
Yeah.
So I want to give a brief little breakdown here. So marketable wealth that does not have a relationship to Social Security, okay? So marketable wealth makes up 62% of white wealth. For Black and Hispanic wealth, that only makes up 35%. That means 65% of wealth in a Black person's retirement is only made up of what they get from Social Security. And they are looking at a 13% loss of their overall net wealth if these budget cuts take into effect in 2033.
To be honest,
Yes.
I don't care about this as much
Okay.
from a racial perspective.
That's fine.
But from a rich versus poor perspective,
Yes.
Social Security is so much better for the poor.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even close. I mean,
Yeah.
the payouts that go to the rich are almost negligible.
Exactly.
Compared to what their annual incomes are.
Yeah.
Right? It's almost completely negligible. So then this asks the question, how do we save it? Do we need to save it? There are some people out here that would say, no, I don't care. Screw Social Security. I fully fund my 401k.
Sure.
I fully fund my Roth IRA.
Yeah.
I don't give a shit about anyone else.
And they're obsessed with the deficit and the debt, and they're like, yeah, we should just stop paying for all that.
Yes. So what I like to see is Gallup asked people these questions. They asked Americans, would you rather increase Social Security taxes or curb future Social Security benefits? 31% of Americans said they wanted to curb benefits, while 61% said they wanted to raise taxes to fund it. This is the highest that raising taxes has ever scored on this question, going back since 2005. And I think this is when Gallup first started asking the question, because 2005 was when George W. Bush started pushing his privatization Social Security plan, where he wanted to get rid of Social Security entirely and replace it with private plans.
I see.
So they started asking this question. This is the first time that we've reached over 60% approval of increasing taxes.
So to me, this means that it's a matter of effectively messaging that these two things are linked.
Yes.
Right? Because otherwise, people just think about the raising taxes, and that's a general bad thing in their mind, and they don't think about how it can save Social Security.
And they don't even, what I like about this question so much that makes me very happy is they don't ask what taxes get raised. They ask the very general raise taxes.
Okay.
Which means when I give you this next fact, It makes all. I would imagine this number goes from 61 to 70 after I read this next fact. Okay.
Okay.
So within the current Social Security's tax structure, currently, people's payroll taxes only pay. So you only pay your Social Security taxes on your first $168,000. Only by removing that cap do we fully fund Social Security. So
Wow.
all we have to do is raise taxes on people who make more than $168,000 a year, and then Social Security is fully funded for like the next 70 years.
That is so backwards.
Isn't it?
Right? Like, if anything,
I could go into the history of this.
the cap should be that no one below 168,000 is paid.
But no.
That's crazy.
So you only your first 168,000. So put that in perspective. If you are making like 50 grand or 60 grand, whatever, like the median income, whatever, I think it's like 60, whatever. I think the median household income is maybe 67 or something like that. You are paying more into Social Security than Jeff Bezos as percentage of your income.
That's insane.
That's insanity, right, guys? I mean, that's insane. Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, that's pretty fucking stupid.
That's hard to argue.
Yeah. Okay. So that's all that has to happen. And I want to kind of give a brief example of why did this take place, right? So one of the main reasons is because income inequality has made this problem so much worse. Why is this making it so much worse? Because as incomes at the top of the economic spectrum continue to grow, their incomes are growing faster than the Social Security tax cap. So say the Social Security tax cap is growing 2% a year, right? The income at the top is growing 5% a year. So as we go from like 1980 to 2020, income at the top has grown by over 125%, while the Social Security cap has only grown by 70%.
Okay.
So less amount of money is being captured by Social Security. So in 1983, this was when Ronald Reagan revolutionized the Social Security system, and he did the best thing of his entire presidency. He doubled the payroll taxes for Social Security, making it fully funded until today. That's what he did. And because of this, he was able to capture 90% of all income generated in the United States was going into the Social Security system.
Okay.
Now, only 81% of all income generated in the United States goes into the Social Security system.
Okay.
If we got that number back to 90%, we would be totally fine. How do we get that number back to 90%? Well, it turns out by eliminating the cap, you get fully back to that 90%.
Why is it only 90? Why isn't eliminating the cap take you to 100?
Why doesn't eliminating the cap take you to 100? I don't think this counts. Well, capital gains taxes aren't hit by. Capital gain income isn't hit by.
So it's removing the other taxes that the government's taking?
What do you mean? No. I'm saying like removing the cap doesn't touch capital gains income. So capital gains income could be income that's not touched by Social Security under any circumstance.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Okay. So it's only certain types of income.
Yes. Oh, yes. It's only labor income.
Okay.
This is only labor income that gets paid into Social Security.
Dividend income also isn't paid into it.
No, dividend income is not paid into Social Security ever.
It is perfect for rich people.
Well, I'll tell you why. This is actually, blame FDR for this.
Okay.
When Social Security was being founded, FDR was actually on the front lines saying that poor people need to pay for Social Security. Swear to God. So a brief history about Social Security. It was really pushed by Francis Perkins. This was the labor secretary under FDR.
Okay.
One of two cabinet members that was with FDR for his entire 14 years or 12 years in office.
Okay.
Her and Harold Ikes. She was also the first woman cabinet secretary. So Francis Perkins was a big proponent of retirement income, of Social Security benefits, of unemployment insurance. Honestly, we might not have any of that if it wasn't for her.
Wow.
It might not exist if we didn't have Francis Perkins in the room pushing for unemployment and Social Security benefits. Might not have happened. But she goes up to FDR and she's like, please, FDR, fund this through a progressive income tax. Please do not fund this through a payroll tax because it's going to take money away from the people at the lower end of the economic spectrum. And FDR was against the idea of total handouts. And he was like, I want people bought into the system. I want it to be insurance. I don't want it to be welfare. I want it to be insurance. So he wants government-run insurance. He thought it would be easier to sell to Congress. He thought it would be harder to get it taken away from people later down the road because people will feel like it is their money that they paid into.
Yeah.
And so he made the decision to fund it through payroll taxes when it could have been funded through progressive income taxes on the rich. And he chose not to do it.
And even if not progressive, like flat taxes that include
Yes.
dividends and capital
Yes.
gains and don't have a cap on them, right?
Yes.
Like,
but he was
wow.
against all of that. And actually, he was also against including a lot of people in Social Security. He didn't include household laborers. So if you were like a maid, you weren't classified for Social Security. If you worked in a restaurant, you couldn't get Social Security.
Wow.
These are things that eventually got added through Post and other administrations. But FDR was not big on this, which is funny because he actually supported in private. He would say he wanted a cradle to grave welfare state. But it comes down to this, he was not. And so because of that, we're still paying the effects.
That's brutal.
Now, what I also want to mention here is even if we change nothing, if we don't increase the Social Security cap, but we don't extend the Trump tax cuts, this would raise $3 trillion over the next decade, and this would single-handedly keep Social Security solvent for a decade.
Wow.
All we have to do is not extend the Trump tax cuts and then put that money to our Social Security trust fund. Everything's fine for another 10 years.
Which means all we have to do is get Biden reelected.
Basically, all we have to do is get Biden reelected, but then Biden has to choose to allocate that money to the Social Security trust fund,
Okay.
which I don't know if he's going to have the balls to do.
Why not?
The Social Security trust fund has been funded by payroll taxes forever for the same reason I just talked about with FDR. It's been looked at as a insurance program that happens to be run by the government.
Okay.
It's not supposed to be viewed as a welfare program. So Biden giving general government funds into the Social Security Trust Fund, that would be breaking the long-standing tradition of Social Security. I hope he does break it, right? I want to see Social Security be treated as a welfare program and an entitlement program rather than the insurance program that happens to be run for the government that it pretends to be.
Yeah.
You know, it's just a hard decision to make.
Yeah. I would think at this time where these political coalitions are changing that it seems like we are so close to being able to create a larger welfare state, right? Because on the Democratic side, more of the Democratic coalition is now made out of college-educated voters, right?
Yeah.
College-educated, wealthier voters. So if you already have those people on board, the people who are going to be less helped by the actual policies, and all you have to do is win over the people who are going to be massively helped by the policies, it seems like we should be in a good position to actually pass them. The problem is, in the current media environment, we're still struggling to get across the message to those people who would be helped by the policies that they should vote for the people who might implement those policies.
And in the current media environment, you don't get benefits for good policy.
Exactly.
You don't get benefits for it. You don't get good airtime for passing a really, really good piece of security legislation.
Yeah.
Obama didn't get good political media points for passing the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
Yes.
Right? When it's actually one of the most amazing institutions ever created by the United States government. Almost nobody knows about it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do know about it, you think it's a conspiracy run by the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, you know, it de-incentivizes politicians to make that hard political calculation to prioritize good governance if they don't get the credit for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and this is a situation where like you blame the media and you have to blame the voters a little bit because it's like the voters are not responding to the correct information or they're not responding to the correct things.
Yeah, well, you can blame the voters, but at that point you have to put the impetus on the voters to seek out the correct information, to do their own fact checking. And the problem, I think you can say like do their own fact checking or
no
dig
one
more
can
into
do all
things.
their own fact checking.
It's so much harder than it sounds.
Yeah, of
right.
course.
Like to actually figure out what's real, and you know that because there are extremely smart people who are professionals at studying these things that form completely different opinions on them. Right.
Yes.
So like there's so many things. There are not clear answers to whether they were good or bad. Whether this policy will help me or whether it will hurt me. There are different perspectives on like how, if a large welfare program was to exist, is that sucking too much money out of the private sector and thus hurting the overall economy? So it still isn't helpful for everyone.
Actually, I want to go on that point you just said. Okay. Sucking money out of the system, will that hurt the private sector? That was actually one of the arguments made to FDR to ask him not to pass Social Security.
Okay.
Because the way that Social Security was originally funded for the first 2 years or so was a 1% tax on your income that you take home, and then your employer matched that 1%, and then it went to the government for a total of 2%. And a lot of people said, FDR, you're going to deflate the economy by sucking this money out of the people's pockets.
Yeah.
You're loosening demand at the lower end of the economic spectrum. And he basically ended up saying, he was like, listen, I get that, but if we don't start it right now, it's never going to start.
Yeah.
So I get where you're coming from with that, and I understand that, but if we don't do it right now, no one will ever do it for that exact reason. Which is true unless he would have taxed the rich to do it.
Yeah. Well, that's why even as I like say these things, I start to think, I feel so convinced, say, that redistributing money from the top of the economic spectrum to the bottom is positive for the overall economy.
Yeah, it is.
At least, right?
Yeah, it is.
So like it's hard to make the argument of why do smart people not think that that's a good idea? Well, then there's the more ideological purist point of view that taxation is theft. And those people earned their money rightfully, and you shouldn't be taking it from them.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be penalizing them for being successful.
Yeah.
And that's an argument that is going to be completely philosophical. So you can't point to facts and information to necessarily change someone's mind.
Right. There's no facts and figures that could ever actually get someone out of that position. No. Right. Because you can't logic somebody out of a position that they didn't logic their way into.